Hey there, and welcome to the Dynamics Hot Dish Podcast, serving up stories and knowledge on Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. This is What's Hot in Dynamics. You're now joining Merlin Schweiger, Liz McGlennon, and Ashley Steiner. Did either or both of you finish watching Loki?
Yes.
And I recall, Ashley, that you were disappointed about it at the start.
Yeah, it's
and I'm
really
wondering if you changed your opinions at all.
No, not at all. It's really hard for me to get back into this discussion because of how mad and upset I was over the whole Loki thing.
Oh.
I think they did him a complete disservice.
It's probably true. I was discussing the same, because you were talking the last time about how you felt like this isn't Loki. This person that they were portraying as Loki was not actually who Loki is.
Right.
And I was discussing this with another friend, and he was like, actually, even more so if you think about it, because the Loki that's in the show is the Loki who just left New York. Mm-hmm. He has had no redemption arcs. He has had no quality time with his brother. He didn't go through Ragnarok. That's a different branch. This branch is all literally just tried to take over Earth.
Right. And I was talking to somebody who's like, oh, but then he watched the video of him sending that thing up the path, and then the guy ended up killing his mom. So right. That was his moment. And I'm like,
right.
Yeah, but he was still evil and horrible after he did that to his mom. In the regular branch, I guess I don't know what we call it. But yeah. So I just feel like they completely took away all the things that make Loki, the cunning and the conniving and deceitful and always undercutting people. Oh, why do you do this to people, Loki? Because I just like to make people feel weak. And I'm like, what? I just feel like it did him and him who he is as character. I just feel like they completely, I always say they Disneyed him. Disney ruins everything, Star Wars, Marvel. Mm-hmm. They gave him a full Disney makeover.
Is what I always
say.
Do you feel like the female variant was more in line with true Loki?
At first, but then she started they got soft.
But you didn't watch. You didn't finish it, did you?
I did.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah. I finished the whole thing. I definitely did the female character more than Tom Hiddleston's character because it was more. Yeah. And I actually, but then there was a lot to the Loki show that I didn't like because you would have had to have read the comics. There was so much at the end that I was Googling because I didn't read the comics. I had no idea who that guy was, that one at the end of time or whatever. I just feel like they left too much in there for only people who read the comics to know.
Yeah. I sort of felt like it, by the time I got to the end, I was like, okay, this kind of feels like a prequel to something. I feel like it was right, but it didn't feel like it was a wholly contained story. It was just a setup to an actual story. It's
we're weak sauce. We're with Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It was clearly a setup for the new Falcon movie.
Yeah.
But you did have a completion. I felt okay, at the end of that, I felt completed. Yeah. But it was clearly a setup for the Falcon movie, where Loki, it was oh, we're making this season just to set you up for the next season.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just curious.
I don't know.
Your thoughts changed.
I'm very passionate about this because Loki is one of my favorite characters of any story of any time. So I was very saddened by, and maybe I just had too high of expectations. Maybe that was my problem too.
Perhaps.
Next they'll be making a Draco Malfoy series, and then that's going to totally ruin that character for me too. What? Draco Malfoy is by far the best character in all of Harry Potter.
So you're big into the anti-heroes, huh?
I am big in the anti-heroes because they're more real. This is a total tangent, but anti-heroes are more realistic, and they're more you're able to compare yourself more to them, because heroes are perfect and they don't do wrong, and they save the world. Everything goes right for them. Where an anti-hero is more who we are. We make mistakes. We are not good all the time. It's just more relatable. And so I've always loved anti-heroes in books. I was a Jacob fan in Twilight, anti-hero. I liked Draco Malfoy. I like Loki. I mean, I have every example. I think everything I've ever read, I've always liked the anti-hero because it was just so much more like relatable because I'm not perfect. I make a lot of mistakes. I would do a lot of dumb things. And so I don't know.
Is that typical to relate more to the antihero?
It is. There's actually like a whole bunch of studies, like, because my boss said something to me about it. Wonder if he's going to listen to this. And he was like, oh yeah, well, he like commented on it and said that there's been like research done that people tend to relate more to the anti-heroes, but then you're not supposed to. And then you feel bad about it. Like, you know, when people love Kylo Ren, but like he's the anti-hero because in the end he does come big spoilers today, apparently, in our podcast. If nobody has seen a movie from like 2018.
I don't feel like I associate with the anti-hero or the hero.
Maybe
like
you're
I'm
just
more
too good a person.
No, I think I'm just more into like the bit character on the side. Like I'm all about the comic relief character.
He's Ron.
Yeah.
He is Ron. He's so Ron.
That fits.
I can never be Harry Potter. That's ridiculous. But
Nobody
Ron,
wants to be Harry.
I could be Ron.
And I feel like I would be the female version of Draco, like undercutting people and only out for myself, which is horrible. But
so
like,
you're basically saying that we can't trust you, Ashley.
That is not what it, oh my gosh, I should just stop talking now. But you know what I'm saying? Like, you're gonna like be out looking out for yourself. Now I think that I have a very team focus. Anyways, and I don't need to, this is not therapy. I don't need to justify myself.
That's actually a great segue though. Talking about being into it for yourself. Negotiation. It's perfect.
Tom Merlin.
Way to make the connection.
Yeah, that was skill right there. I'm gonna say I'm impressed.
Managed to bring it back around to the topic at hand. What is the topic at hand? Yeah, negotiation. Salary, pay, talking about how to look out for yourself, especially in the dynamic space, because we're all comfortable with dynamic space. So Ashley, as our anti-hero, I think you get to go first with your number one idea, tip, whatever.
Yeah, so I'll start with this. So I actually went to negotiation training because actually one of my bosses sent me several years ago. I actually took the class at Harvard, which does nothing to say like my negotiation skills are horrible. So like, sorry, Harvard, for that. But like what I learned about negotiation is it's not just like when you're countering with people, like in a pay situation. Like I think that that's like the most common thing that you think of, like, oh, when I'm like bartering or like, you know, that kind of thing. But I think that in everyday meetings, you're doing a negotiation with people because you're trying to like get them to agree to your timeline or your price or your scope or your, or even just your idea or belief. So it's not like okay, I'm going to give you this if you give me that, but like you are saying that under, like if you read between the lines. And so that was the reason I actually went to negotiation training, is because I was so heavy on like my way that my boss was like, you got to learn how to like get your way, but get it in a way where they also feel like they're getting what they want. You know, and so I found that like really, and it's a skill. Like I think negotiation is 100% a skill that you learn. I don't know many people who were born with like the ability to like make you feel like you're getting something at the bad end of a stick or something. But yeah, that's why I went to the training and I learned a lot. So
I assume that most people who were born with that trait probably go into like politics or something.
Lawyer,
like
I was thinking.
Yeah, I don't think it comes naturally to a lot of people. It's something you kind of have to practice and continue working on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Especially females, I feel like, are usually more uncomfortable with it, or minority groups. Because culturally, you've not really been taught to like stick up for yourself or like, you know, you kind of have to be confident or like arrogant to almost a degree to like put yourself out there to ask for something or ask for more.
Well, and have we decided if we're allowed to swear on this podcast? Because like I think that when you're a male, right, so you get offered a job as a male, you know, men are always saying like, oh, I'm worth more than that, or I can do more. And it's okay for men to look like an a-hole in the job, like in the workplace. It's just common. But women are not allowed to look like B words. I don't know if we're allowed to swear on this. I don't know if we've ever talked about that.
We can mark it as explicit if we do.
But you know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's a negative connotation for a woman to come off like an a-hole, but it's okay for men.
It's a strength for a man.
Yeah, it is, because they're seen as hardened or whatever that, you know, that
and
is.
let's say a white man there, because I think that's more accurate. Yeah,
that's fine. I mean, I'm
yeah.
trying to not like put people into corners, but I agree. Like, I think that it's more okay for men to come off that way than women.
And we're generalizing too.
Oh,
right?
for
like
sure.
we know that there's always exceptions, and
Right.
Yeah.
I've actually told numerous like female coworkers of mine over the course of time, like, if you're going into a room where you're negotiating, and to your point, actually, it doesn't have to be about pay or job. It could just be about like, you know, you really feel like this is the way the project needs to go, or this is kind of what the solution needs to look like. I said, channel your inner white man. The inner white man walking into that room is not worried about what's everybody going to think about me. Like, is that person going to judge me for what I'm wearing? Is that person going to judge me for the words that I'm using? Is that person going to judge me for whatever? Like, no. As the white man, I can assure you that I'm walking into that room thinking, of course my idea is the best idea. Of course I know what I'm talking about. And anyone who doesn't agree with me is just missing key data. And when you walk in with that of course attitude, then you have that level of confidence that then lets other people be like, oh, well, I mean, if he or she is so confident about that, then I mean, who am I to question?
I think something that you said there that's really key is like how people perceive you, because I think that, and Beth even talked about this a couple weeks ago on our podcast, right, where we have these gender norms, like how do we expect men and women to behave and act. And I think that women care a lot more about what people think of them just naturally, because, you know, maybe we naturally have more empathy or sympathy, or, you know what I mean? Like, we're just expected to care. And so I think that when women kind of fight that a little bit, they're kind of, they think of that woman as not feminine, and that's not okay. Where you need to break, I think, those gender norms. It's okay for a woman to have ideas and speak up. And it's okay for a man to not, you know, like, you don't have to, as a man, you don't always have to have the answer either. So I think that it goes both ways.
Yeah, it's true.
Actually, I want to circle back to what you said in the beginning about learning to not kind of alienate the person you're bargaining with and like get the hard feelings or like a toxic relationship there. I also went to a negotiation strategies class, and we read a book called Gating to Yes by Roger Fisher. And that book's all about how do you kind of give and take and like not get hard feelings and kind of be fair and have trust through the negotiation process, to not have that person that maybe doesn't get their way to like walk away with hard feelings or feeling they got like ripped off or something. And so if you're looking to, I don't know, learn about new strategies, I'd recommend that book.
I'll say what I found most fascinating about taking that class is they actually, you know, we talk about it, we prep, and then you actually have to go negotiate with somebody. I was much better negotiating with another woman than I was the man. I let the man just like take advantage, and I was like, sure, whatever, like whatever you want, let's just go with that. I was much less willing to like go back and forth.
Why do you think that was?
You know, I wish this was 5 years ago. Like, I wish I was more in the place of like when I actually took it. But I think it was just the, like, I didn't want to stand up. Like, I didn't
even though it wasn't even real, like it was
right.
A mock. Yeah.
It was a mock. I mean, and we each had objectives. It's all like staged, right? Like, here's your objective. Here's what you want to get to. And I actually was negotiating this one exercise, and the teacher was like, no, you gave in too much. You have to go back and redo it.
Wow.
Because like, I didn't feel comfortable standing up and being like, no, this is what I need in order for this to be a fair deal. And I'm sure a lot of women feel that way.
So I also did mock negotiations in my class. I didn't have an issue like with that, but I'm a lot more confident when it's pretend than I am in real life, because, you know, it's just, you know, for fun or for practice, and it's not real. So I'm just thinking, like, if you struggled with it in a fake setting, like how much harder would that be to do in real life then?
Yeah, I'm actually a lot better at it in real life, because It's like something I'm actually passionate about. Like, I have like something like pay is one. I always tell everybody, always negotiate your pay. Because if you just accept what they give you, then you're showing that you're not worth like more. You need to prove your worth. And so like for pay, like I have no problem coming back with numbers and being like, nope, if you don't give me this, I'm not gonna like, yeah. So it's because it's something that I actually care about. So I feel like the skills that I learned there helped me become better in my like actual real life examples for like my actual life.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it says something that of the three of us, I'm the only one who has not taken a class or a course or read a book or anything at all on negotiation.
Because you're a white man.
Probably because
no, it was a required course, so it wasn't an elective for me. But it was one of my favorites.
I might also just be the worst of all three of us at negotiating too. That's also perfectly.
I don't know. My company paid for me to go to Boston and take a class at Harvard. I wasn't gonna say no.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if you're thinking about pay negotiations specifically, we'll try to circle back around to that topic. How do you, so Ashley, you said this is the thing you are passionate about and you believe everyone should negotiate for their pay.
Especially women.
How do you figure out what you're actually worth? Because I feel like that's always my biggest question. I say always, as though I've changed jobs more than twice in the last decade. Like I feel like figuring out what your market rate is a real trick. And I feel, at least my perspective is, if I were to ask for dramatically more than my market rate, then I would just come off as greedy or overly arrogant, even for a white man. But if I don't ask for enough, then to your point, like I'm not representing the value. And so
yeah, and you don't want to be anchored too low, because anchoring is a real thing where like whatever number you start with, now it's plus or minus from that number. And so if you start way too low, you're stuck too low until basically you renegotiate somewhere and start over.
So how do you figure out what your rate should be?
Research. Yeah, I was gonna say research. That's the first thing I always do is I like Google the job that I am applying for or want and just do like a salary. So like obviously the salary in California and New York is going to be higher than where I live in Wisconsin. But I also don't think that just because I live in Wisconsin, I should get paid. Like I should still make my worth, if that makes sense. Because like just because I have a lower cost of living than somebody in New York doesn't mean that I'm less good at my job than somebody in New York. So I think that that's something that I always take into consideration and an argument that I make. If I was to ask for like significantly more, I did have the mistake of once of asking not enough. And they were like, actually, this position is offering at this amount. And that was a really awkward and uncomfortable situation for me because I thought I was going in with a really high number and they came back and it made my number look like pennies. And that was like so that was just lack of knowledge of not knowing, but also like not knowing that I was worth that amount of money. So like I think that like knowing what that position pay is like everybody, like an average or things like that. But I do think location comes into play too, because obviously my cost of living is a lot lower than even Minneapolis.
And it's easy to look up cost of living for your city. Like that data's all on the internet. So a lot of times when I think people interview, the employer asks them what they want. How do you guys feel about asking first, like what's the job, like the salary range for this job so that you're not setting the number the employer is?
You know, what's weird is the last 2 or 3 jobs, I think they gave me a number first. So I don't even know if I can't recall. I think, or maybe I did that. I said, well, what is it starting at? Because I can tell you what I'm making, or I'm going to lie and tell you I'm making more than I am, which I also do. I mean,
have you ever had someone ask for like a pay stub though to prove it? I have.
Nope. I've never had anyone.
I'm not sure that's legal.
I have definitely been asked. I did not work for that company, but I've been asked that before.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's really weird.
I think it was for a partner that got acquired.
So ironically though, I also think of like, because you guys are both consultants, right? And you have hourly rates in theory. I always think, like if I was a consultant, how much would I charge this company if I was gonna because I mean, specific to dynamics, you can think that way. So if I was an independent consultant, what hourly rate would I charge? And obviously you can't charge as much like to the company as an employee as you could a consultant, but I also base it off of that. Like I've done some projects just on the side for some friends that own companies and things like that. And I know my worth based on what I've charged them hourly. So
that's a good point. And like part of why consultants can charge more is that there's no benefits, right? And so like we've been talking all about salary, but when you negotiate, you need to think of all of the options. So you have PTO, you have all your benefits and other perks that you can use. You know, maybe they're not going to give you more money, but maybe you can get more time off or something. And so you can use those too as options.
The time off is key because I guess it just depends on where you are in your life, right? But like at this point in my life, I'd be way more happy with like 5 extra days of PO or 10 days than like you know what I mean? Like the time off to like go see, well, I guess with COVID, like you don't really go anywhere, but you know what I'm saying? So I think that like also determining where you are in your life, maybe that time off is more, like you said, more valuable.
What your priorities are, or maybe you want to be somewhere that has excellent healthcare coverage, you know, like whatever is going on in your life that's most important.
Or even working from home.
Yeah, like flexibility.
The new, you know, maybe you're willing to take, because there's actually a study that's been done that people are willing to like take 12 grand less on average or something if you can work from home full time.
But some people want to travel and some people want to relocate too. Like I had a friend that really, well, Merlin knows her too, but she really wanted to move to New York and she took the job that would pay to relocate her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you got to find out what is most important to you in your life at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think that if your company has awful benefits, like awful healthcare, I think asking for more is not always out of the question either. Because you might want to go find better healthcare somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. I guess keeping in mind that sometimes, especially smaller businesses, being somebody who is in a smaller business, you can really only do so much about the healthcare before it becomes absolutely cost prohibitive. So, but that's an area where, you know, to your point, maybe you can get more salary so that you could pay for it somewhere else, or fill up the HSA account, or I don't know.
Or maybe working at a small company is not for you just because your priorities align with something else. I think that also people have to take that into consideration.
Yeah, that could be the case. Years and years ago, a company that I was working for kind of like went independent. They split off from their partner, their parent company. So they got a lot smaller. And so healthcare costs went way up. And one of the guys who worked there, he'd already been there for years and years, had like within the year prior had a baby that needed a whole bunch of like medical stuff and like basically like at home, like tons of equipment, and like his healthcare costs were essentially enormous. And just the act of the company splitting off into a smaller group and getting their own healthcare was gonna like jump his health spending like $2,000 a month or something like that. And like at that point, it's, you know, even if you love the company, like that's just, it's cost prohibitive. And so then he ended up going and getting a job at a larger organization that had, you know, the larger pool of people so that his healthcare expenses wouldn't be so crazy. Yeah.
Merlin, I want to go back to your question about knowing your value. I think something else you can do is get multiple offers.
That's true too. And I think I actually like, Liz, your point about turning the question around. Somebody's like, well, you know, what are you hoping to make? To turn that around to, well, what's this job pay? One of the things that like I want to get us to, I'm not there yet, but one of the things that I want to focus on getting us to is in my organization, I want to have like documented, publicly published, or at least internal to the company, publicly published, like pay ranges for all of the jobs at all the different skill levels, so that you can say, well, I have these skills at this level, so I fall into this range. So now I know I should be making somewhere between here and here, right? And I feel like the benefit of having a more open range like that is it makes it easy for people to like see where they want to be. Like, well, I'd like to be making $180,000 a year instead of $100,000 a year. What are the skill sets that I need to get up to the 180 range, right? Or, and I think it also helps eliminate a lot of the like the anchoring problem, or, you know, well, you got hired in as a junior person who knew nothing, so we're only paying you $40,000 a year, but sorry, company policy is I can't give you a raise that's more than like 4% of your existing salary. And so, you know, by the time you retire, maybe you'll hit six figures. Unless you, you know,
or they'll
jump
leave.
to another job, or they'll leave, which is of course exactly what happens. You're like, well, I'm stuck here, and because of policies or whatever, I can only move up so much, or I can get a job over there that's 2-3 times what I'm making. Well, now you just lost your great talent.
I think that transparency would prove that it's fair too, and there would never be kind of that underlying, I don't know, I feel like you get that at sometimes where you work, where like people just feel like it's not equal for skill or experience or whatever.
Yeah.
When I can get a little personal on this, because I actually just went through a promotion at my company. You know, I've changed job titles. I have a team.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That's not the point of this, but I just went through this, right? Where I asked for a title as part of this, and my boss said, "Oh, I'm actually thinking, you know, a manager would be more appropriate." And I said, "Cool. What do I have? Like, what would the qualifications be, or what would I need to do in order to get the title that I'm looking for?" And he was like, "Oh, good question." And he outlined a few things, like, here are the criteria that I would consider somebody having that level of a title. And so now that gives me a goal of what I can aim for to go for what I'm looking for. But I think a lot of people are afraid to ask those questions. Like, and I feel like that's a negotiation tactic too. Like, okay, like, you're not willing to give me that. What do I have to do to get there? And being bold enough to ask that question rather than just accepting what you're being given. So what I accepted the title, of course, because I love my company and I actually really enjoy working here. But together with my boss, we've created a plan and a goal for me to get where I want to be. And obviously there's some work that goes into that. And I think that that's really beneficial.
I totally agree.
And that's great. And it's also great that you turned that informal conversation into a goal and a plan, because I feel like otherwise it would have been really easy for your boss, if you were a less good boss, your boss to be like, "Oh, well, if you had, you know, this and this, or you did those things, then you'd be whatever. Then I'd make you a vice president." And you go and do those things, and then a year later you're like, "Okay, I did those things, like I want this title," and he'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. No, I think you need to do these things, right? And then it gets lost in the shuffle.
And the finish line just kind of keeps getting pushed out on you, and you never get there. Right. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, so I like that you could turn it into a document. It's like, here's a plan, here's what we're going for, and then once I've done these things, then I get this thing that I wanted.
But I think that goes back to just negotiation in general, because like whenever you're negotiating, sometimes, I mean, you're starting an uncomfortable situation, which I think is what people don't like about negotiation, is because you have to put both parties, so let's say it's two people, both parties get into an uncomfortable position where they're feel like they're losing something to gain something, right? Or like they always feel, and this is what I was taught in my negotiation class, is that it's a very uncomfortable position to be in when you're in that negotiation. And sometimes you do have to step away in order to like regroup. Okay, what am I willing to give up? But I also think that it's just in those uncomfortable situations, making sure that you're asking the right questions. Like, okay, like, you're not willing to give up this, but like, what are you willing to give up? Or like, what are you willing to give as feedback? Things like that. So I think that being vulnerable and making yourself open to being uncomfortable is key in negotiation, because you might feel it sometimes that you're not getting what you want, but it's all about putting yourself into that situation that you feel a little uncomfortable and then being willing to give up.
I think you should always go into the negotiation with kind of your worst case scenario too, like, how low am I willing to go? Or like, what, to your point, actually, like, what am I willing to give up? And like, stick to that, because you don't want to be persuaded past that point where it's more harmful to you than you were willing to accept when you were like rationally prepping for it versus like in the moment. So I'd say like figure that ahead of time, write it down, and don't budge. Like, it's not worth it to do something that before you weren't willing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Or even if you do think that you want to budge, take Ashley's advice and step away for a bit.
Walk away. Right? Yeah.
Like I need to think about this. Like, I need to kind of go through it a little bit. Let's just take a pause and circle back to this in a couple of days or whatever, right? Like, I think that's, you don't need to be afraid to walk away, because one of the one of the sort of worst negotiating tactics is to apply pressure and make it feel like, well, if you don't agree to this immediately now, then it's going to be gone forever and you're never going to get it again and whatever. Like I literally was just on the phone with, who was it? Somebody the other day, and they were like, oh, well, if you just hang out for this thing and then we'll give you this trip at this price, and that way you can get like, we'll put you through a timeshare thing. And I'm just like, okay, I know where all this goes, right? And it's like they just walk you through this like, oh, well, which of these trips sounds best to you? Great. So I can give you that trip for this incredibly low price. So which credit card would you like to put that on? And they just sort of make this assumption, that you're just going to keep moving forward. And as long as you keep answering their questions, you end up buying something that you had no intention of buying.
I think. Go ahead, Merlin. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
I was just gonna like take a pause.
So I have 2 comments on what you said. So first off is that walking away thing is probably the most valuable part that I learned from the negotiation, that it's not a sign of weakness, right? It is it is okay to walk away. But the second thing is your entire story made me think of car sales. I don't know if any of you have bought a new car or used car or whatever, but the only time I've ever bought a car, by myself, I was alone, it was a brand new car, had 12 miles on it, and he wasn't getting to the price that I wanted. So I walked away. And I think that especially in the transportation industry, whatever, they tend to take advantage, automotive, they take advantage of women, right? Like, oh, they don't know. So I walked away. And then I came back and he goes, oh, well, you came back the same day. So that means that you're interested. And I was like, well, of course I'm interested. I wouldn't have negotiated with you before if I wasn't. Like, have you adjusted at all? And so he did. And so, but he was like, oh, you came back, so I'm going to get you. And I'm like, I'll walk away again. So I think that it's okay to try to, it's not about getting the upper hand, but it's about making sure that you're getting something that's fair.
Yeah.
But yeah. Used car is what I think of, Merlin, in your entire story.
Right. Like, well, if you walk away now, I'll never get you this price ever again. Okay. Well, I didn't want that price anyway.
Let me go up to the big boss and see if I can get this lowered a little bit. Yeah.
Yep. That's hilarious.
So any last thoughts on negotiation? Any tips for people?
I mean, if you're not a white man, channel the inner white man. He is confident. He knows his value. He's not afraid of anybody.
Sometimes I worry if we're going to get in trouble for saying things like that, because it is kind of a generalization.
I mean, of course.
Yeah, we're generalizing.
Yeah.
It's all generalizing.
Yeah.
I guess it's similar to the walking away bit, but I don't know if you guys are actually in your class, you heard of BATNA. Mm-hmm. So it's the best alternative to a negotiated strategy. And so it's always having a backup plan. So feeling comfortable, I have plan B that I can go do if I really just want to walk away from this. And so having that again in mind before you go into the negotiation.
I think that my last thing is just making sure that you recognize the negotiation is not just a deal. It's not pay. It's not buying something. You're constantly negotiating with people in a conversation, going into a strategy planning or design meeting. All of that can, the skills that you learn in negotiation can be applied to a lot of different types of business meetings and business interactions. So learning the skills in a professional setting, I think are really beneficial just overall, not even just trying to buy a car like I've done. Mm-hmm. It's helped me in meetings, set a precedent or kind of level set where people are and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. It makes me think too, I also had a class on persuasion and influence, and I think using those tactics hand in hand work really nicely.
We're gonna have to talk about that sometime, Liz. I am intrigued to hear about persuasion.
Sure. Future podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Dynamics Hot Dish podcast. For additional content and previous episodes, check out our website at dynamicshotdish.com, follow us on Twitter at dynamicshotdish, and subscribe to our podcast for notifications. Thanks. See you next time.